Okay, hello everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at measuring angles. Now before we actually get into angles and their measurements, the one thing that we need to do is we need to take a look at some very important terminology so that we have a very clear idea of how angles are formed and how we can go about measuring them. Now the first thing that we're going to take a look at is a ray. An array is going to be a line with a starting point which continues in only one direction without end. So now I have three examples of rays. So this is a ray. Notice that it has a starting point and it continues in this direction without end. Same thing for this ray and same thing for that ray. Now of course the one thing that we want to do is we want to be able to name them as well. And so notice what we have is we have points. And the point on this ray, the starting point on this ray is A, and it goes to the point B. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this notation to describe the ray AB. Now this is going to be the ray DC, so notice that it starts at this point D and it goes through C. Notice that this ray here is ray GF because it starts at G and it goes through F. Okay, so there's a couple of things that we really want to consider when we're writing notation to describe a ray. And the first thing is that capital letters are going to be used for the points and the starting point as well as the point which it goes through. So notice that all of these are capital letters there. And notice that the arrow always points to the right when we go ahead and write the ray notation. So that's going to be helpful because what that does then is it tells us that A is actually the starting point, D is the starting point, and G is the starting point. Now some people might want to go ahead and write F as the starting point and then it goes through G, but that's not true because otherwise it would go in the other direction and the starting point would be different. So it's going to be very important that you keep these things in mind when we're writing and using the notation to talk about a specific ray. Now what happens then is that when we go ahead and put two rays together so that they have a common endpoint, what we form is what is called an angle. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Notice that we have a ray which is AB, and we have another ray which is AC, and notice that they have a common endpoint, which in this case is going to be A. Now that common endpoint is going to be called the vertex, which is a very, very important word, so always remember that. So we have the vertex here, and notice the two rays with a common endpoint, which forms what is called an angle, and this is going to be the angle. Okay, now how are we going to go ahead and talk about that angle and use notation to represent it? This is what we use. We say that this, which is slightly different from an L, and L would be a little bit too much. It's more like that. So this is going to be the angle BAC, this is the angle BAC, or the angle CAB, which is CAB, or the angle A, which is right there. Now notice where the vertex point is located in the notation. Notice that it's A, and if we use three letters to represent the angle, then the vertex is always going to be the middle letter. Now it's very clear here that this is just one particular angle that we're creating, and so we can also go ahead and talk about that as the angle A. So another type of notation that you might come across as well is this notation here. Notice it is exactly the same that we have here, except for there's going to be this little caret right above the vertex value, right above the vertex point to indicate that that's the vertex. Okay, now once we go ahead and form an angle using rays, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to measure the angle. Now, how do you go about measuring the angle? What is that actually? It is the amount of turn or rotation from one ray to the other. So now what we're going to use is we're going to use a protractor to measure the amount of turn, and the unit of measure is going to be called a degree. So if I go ahead and take a look at this particular angle here, and let's just say that it's 20 degrees, then I can say that the angle BAC is going to be equal to 20 degrees. Now, one of the things that you want to go ahead and take a look at is notice that when I actually go ahead and denote the measure of the angle, I'm going to go ahead and draw this arc in the angle itself to represent the amount of degree or turn. And then I'm going to go ahead and use an arrow to describe which way I'm turning. Okay, now, in addition to that, angles can also be referred to by using Greek letters. So I could have said that theta is equal to 20 degrees, alpha is equal to 20 degrees, or beta is equal to 20 degrees, so long as I also go ahead and put that theta there, okay, in the diagram so that it's clear what it's referring to. So what we can do then is we can now, after we go ahead and determine how to measure degrees, is that we can classify them, or we can talk about different types of angles based upon their measurements. And so what we have then is we have acute angles, right angles, obtuse angles, straight angles, and reflex angles. So acute angles are going to be angles that are anywhere between 0 and 90 degrees, not 0 nor 90 degrees. A right angle, of course, is when the angle is 90 degrees. Obtuse is when an angle is between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. Again, not 90 degrees nor 180 degrees. Because if it is 180 degrees, we call it a straight angle. And if it is a reflex angle, it is going to be between 180 degrees and 360 degrees without it being 360 degrees. Okay, so what we'll do in class the next time that we meet is I have this particular diagram here of all of these different angles. There's so many different angles in here. And what we want to do is we want to place where these angles would possibly be. So for example, if I have the angle OAB, if I go OAB like this, what kind of angle is that? And well, it's clear that this is actually just going to be an acute angle. So this is going to be angle AOB. Okay, so I would like you to go ahead and continue with that, and we'll see exactly what we come up with and determine whether or not everybody has the same idea of how to go about classifying angles based upon their measurements. Okay, so let's wrap up. Again, make sure that we understand the important terminology regarding angles. Okay, we have a ray, and remember we have capital letters for points. The arrow is always pointing to the right, and this value is always going to be the starting point. Once we have two rays put together with a common endpoint, which is called the vertex, we create what is called an angle, and then we use a protractor to measure the amount of turn or rotation, and we use the unit of measure called degrees to represent that amount of turn or rotation. Okay, and then after we go ahead and we can measure angles, then we can classify them by their types. And again, when we meet the next time, we'll go ahead and talk about what types of angles you see here and how we should classify those angles. So we'll take a look at that particular problem when we come back to class the next time that we meet. See you later. Bye-bye.